From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A program at your child's school could soon be going national after a special visit this week. Plus, saying yes to getting troubled teens back on the right track. But first, how low is too low when it comes to bonding out of jail? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Kansas sheriffs say they're worried about the number of people accused of committing violent crimes who are still getting out on bond. For example, 19-year-old Darian Boone bonded out of jail less than 48 hours after police arrested him on murder charges here in Wichita. The Sedgwick County Sheriff says more and more Kansans are putting down as little as 1% of their bond with bonding companies, and he wants to see that change. KAKE's Jocelyn Schifferdecker spoke with lawmakers about what it would take for that to happen.
Being able to bond out of jail while you wait for your trial to begin is a constitutional right. It is protected both in the 8th Amendment of the United States Constitution and in the Kansas State Constitution. However, State Representative John Carmichael says he doesn't think the pretrial system should be as simple as it currently is because each case has a variety of factors.
We have to look at cases hopefully using scientifically validated models to determine who is a risk of flight and who is a risk to harm other people while they're on bail.
However, he explains that evaluating cases on an individual basis takes resources and time, which is why there's no quick answer to fix this problem. He explains there has been previous discussion in the government to potentially change the current bail system, but those got put on the back burner when the COVID-19 pandemic began.
The right to be released on bond in Kansas should not be dependent upon your wealth.
Representative Stephen Owen says he agrees this is a conversation that should take place, and he knows some groups that are interested in bringing it up in legislative session. However, there is no guarantee that anything will come out of it.
If it is of importance by the time the session gets here, and that one of these organizations want to, if they introduce legislation, then I am sure that there will be a hearing.
Both lawmakers agree the right to bail is an integral part to our American justice system. They just aren't sure if the current procedure in place is the most effective one.
And joining us to discuss this and other topics this week, we've got State Representative Casey O'Habison, a Wichita Democrat, here by Zoom. We caught him when he was out of town on a trip. Plus, on set, we've got State Representative Nick Hoheisel, a Wichita Republican, and Adam Strunk, Managing Editor of the Harvey County Now. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I'm going to start here on set with you guys. Really, the way I see it, kind of two issues involved here. The question of who should be allowed to bond out or bail out, and the question of who can afford to bail or bond out under the current system. And those two sides are kind of clashing heads.
Well, yes, and then there's the constitutional side too, where you do have protections from being kept in jail without having the opportunity to bond out. And I mean, how do you balance that? That's why it's the really difficult issue. I don't know, you're in the legislature. Have you guys had talks about that? Have you had some thoughts?
You know, I think there's been a few proposals about bail reform, and I think they've came from the cash bail side, doing away with cash bail. And I agree with you. You do have a constitutional 8th Amendment right to not have excessive bail or have reasonable bail. And we have to remember in this conversation, bail is not set to be punitive, to be a punishment. It is to guarantee to the courts that the defendant will show up and face a jury of his peers and answer to the crimes that have been alleged. That's what the bail system is for. It's not to be punitive. Everybody has a right there. They are innocent until proven guilty. And so we have to make sure that in that bail system that everybody except for those who are a flight risk or who are a danger to society has access to bail. And the conversations may come up next year in Topeka. There may be legislation, but I'm not sure what expanded role the legislators should play in this.
Definitely a question that's raising a lot of conversation. Casey, what are your thoughts on this, especially with these kind of competing priorities when we talk about bail bonds?
Well, I will say that I agree with my colleague with respect to making sure that individuals do have access, because of course it is a constitutional right. But with respect to legislative, I think what we can do is try to see if we can basically make it more transparent in terms of what bail companies are charging with respect to their interest rates, to make sure it's transparent, so that anyone who actually is an offender, has that right to see what's available. So it's not actually how will I say, those that have have access to a lot of money, are able to strike a deal with bonds. With the bonds company. So I think legislative, in terms of making the whole process more transparent, is actually needed, and that's something that we can be able to fix in the legislature.
To follow up on that, if I may, Pilar, the issue on this, the outrage seems to be around the 1% down payment to a bail bonds company. We also have to make sure that we don't have a two-tier justice system where only the rich can access bail. And bail, no matter what, if it's 1% or 10% down from an individual to a bail bonds company, that bail bonds company is still putting up the total amount of the bond. And in these 1% down, it's a 1% down and then payments throughout. And this does give folks without the means to bail out the opportunity to bail out. So I think when we're having those discussions in Topeka, if they do come, we have to keep that in mind, that we can't set up a two-tier justice system. We have to give everybody an equal access to bail.
Yeah.
Well, I was just interested in, and maybe some of the people watching would be interested in, discussions about removing a cash bail system. What would be kind of the alternative for people who aren't really aware or understanding of our criminal justice system?
So I haven't set in. I know those discussions have been had in Topeka. They haven't gained any steam. I haven't set in on those, but I know there are some states that perhaps have gone to that method. I'm not sure what the alternative is and how they're guaranteeing the individual or the suspect is showing up to court, or what the success rate is. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is protecting constitutional rights, but making sure the accused shows up to face a jury of his peers.
And I think we're one of the few industrialized countries that operates on a cash bail system.
I believe so, yeah, if I remember my...
I don't want to say it wrong, but...
Exactly. Casey, one last question on this topic. What are your thoughts on the idea of eliminating cash bail?
Eliminate? Well, I'm open to it. That's for sure. But again, this actually, with respect to the issue, this actually is a broader picture in terms of criminal justice reform that we need to look at, whether it's this or whether it's other issues within our criminal justice system. We definitely need to take a look at and address it.
And before we move on, I do think something we were talking about earlier, I think that is interesting, it was a point you brought up earlier, is judges. This also, we're looking for a legislative answer to this, but I mean, all of these bails are set as discretionary bails, and sometimes maybe we also need to look at judges and their decisions as part of the solution.
Yeah, certainly something that's come up as well with the Marion County record issue, and just kind of perhaps the training of judges and what they can and can't do and should be doing.
As in the entire criminal justice system, it's not perfect, and there are errors, and unfortunately things do go wrong from time to time.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on, a new project in Reno County aims to support juvenile offenders so they don't repeat their mistakes. It's called Project Yes. Project Yes. It stands for Youth Empowerment Services. It's a Reno County program that sets up individual plans to help Kansas youth in trouble turn things around. It's completely voluntary and sets up a list of goals like getting a job and setting up a checking account, and then laying out the individual steps needed for the teen to reach those goals. The program runs during the gap between when a teen arrives in juvenile custody and when they go to court. Organizers say it's crucial to fill that time with positive action. The formal program lasts 10 months, but counselors continue to follow the teen for the next year. Assessors say lower-level offenders aren't seeing consequences for their actions as often or getting the help they need to turn things around. That's where this program comes in.
Kids who fall into a pattern of behavior that they have a hard time changing. And so the people that are going to be working with them through Project Yes will be able to support them, walk alongside them to make some better choices, set some goals for themselves, and hopefully find some successes.
And as we look at this issue, Casey, I'm going to start with you this time. We've no doubt had an increase in juvenile crime in Wichita throughout the state. Lots of talk of how to handle it. This is one idea. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very good program. I think any program like this that actually will help youths, actually put them on the right path I think it's a a good program to have throughout our state. What we need to do is actually find ways to make sure that we're supporting it, not just in Hutchinson, but throughout our state, and actually for us to model it so that other states can actually take a look at what we're doing to some of the juveniles that are having some issues per se, how we're actually putting them on the right path for progress in their future. So I think it's a right step, in the right direction, and whatever way we can do to support it in the legislature, definitely I'm all for it.
I know a few years ago we overhauled the juvenile criminal justice system here in Kansas, and there's been some complaint on the part of law enforcement that it was too much because we swung more toward the side of trying to put folks into treatment, but we didn't have the treatment systems in place. This seems to be starting to address that.
Yeah, and I watched a story today. I think it's a great program. I'm very hopeful for this. Anytime we can get earlier intervention to these kids that may be suspects in the future or are going down the wrong path is great, and try to cut it off before they get into the adult criminal justice system where you just start piling up penalties and fees and a criminal record. So any earlier intervention we can get is always a great thing.
Well, and it's probably more of a cost-effective use of tax dollars as well, because hopefully if you can stop this early, then you're not spending time, because just covering courts, like someone gets in the system and you've been at a paper for 8 years and you just kind of watch them go through and through and through again. And if you could help some of those people before they got into the system, like what a benefit that would be.
Yeah, and I kind of liken that to same thing with mental health reform. Like
Sure.
The earlier intervention we get pays off just spades on the back end for taxpayers.
Yeah, it seems like a big price tag when you look at it at the beginning end until you factor in the years down the road.
Yep.
All right, well, moving on from Kansas City to Topeka, Derby, and Wichita, leaders from the U.S. Department of Education toured Kansas schools this week. One district got high reviews for programs it's implemented, as Cake's Jackson Overstreet shows us.
If you're finding something that's working in education like we're finding here in Wichita, we need to put a bright light on that. We need to spotlight it.
Inside this remodeled classroom, Deputy U.S. Education Secretary Cindy Martin is being shown a relatively new project at Jackson Elementary, a mindfulness room. It was created by the school's counselor and funded by federal COVID education money.
So it's an opportunity for kids to learn different skills, learn what makes them energized, what makes them to calm down if they need to calm down, and then to use those same skills in the classroom and throughout life in order to meet their needs for their social emotional support.
Martin is touring school districts in the Midwest over the next week to see examples of how educators use their influx of federal money from the last few years. The mindfulness room is just one example of several with how Wichita schools use its federal funding. The tour also stopped at the district's Future Ready Center, which opened earlier this year.
We've tried to invest some of the money in long-term investments.
It's great to see real concrete examples of dollars being put to work. This is what Investing America looks like.
Martin says it's vital for officials in the Department of Education to visit schools and see firsthand what is working. She says it can inform a lot of what they do on a national level.
We like to go to places like Wichita where what is being done here is highly replicable. It's sustainable, it's scalable, it's systematic, it's systemic, it's equitable.
A lot of words that those of us who follow education have heard a lot, like equitable.
It's like a bingo card.
Right? But also some thoughts in there. One that kind of particularly struck me as somebody who has followed the legislature and education in Kansas for a long time now. We've heard a lot and increasingly lately, the Kansas schools don't effectively spend the money that they get. And yet, here's a program that the feds are saying, we should see this copied in other states. That sounds like a pretty effective use of dollars to me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It was a great thing to see. The Future Ready Center with the Wichita Public Schools is a great, again, we're talking about investing early and paying off down the road, and using, and I mean, we were flushed with COVID funds for good and for bad, I'll say, but putting those together, or putting those dollars to work, investing in the future is always key.
So Casey, I'm going to drag you in here real quick. What impact do you see something like this and this national approbation of a Wichita program having on perhaps legislation next session?
Well, the first of next session, I think my good friend Representative Hojas will agree with me, is that we need to find a way to make sure that we fully fund special education. If programs like this are working, there's evidence that it is. We have federal dollars coming in, and is a beautiful program. We can do more, and by that I mean that we need to do and our commitment to our kids, not just at USC 259, but throughout our state, and actually fund special education all the way. So I think that's something that we need to take a look at. If there are some of my colleagues who I wouldn't necessarily say always have doubts with public education, they can just take a look at this program to see what it's doing, and actually the evidence is right there that is the dollars that is coming down from the federal government is actually working. We can do more to make sure that we make education here in our state, the best in the nation. So basically what we can do next in that session, fund special education to the fullest. So that's where I stand on that.
Okay, so I guess I'm not too surprised to hear special education come up. That's been a big rallying cry, especially in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with my Democratic colleague on this issue. I've voted the past few years every time to fully fund special education here in Kansas when it comes up. I will have one minor caveat though. While we need to do our part on the state level to fully fund special education, we also need the feds to pick up their end, because the feds are the ones that are dropping the ball as well. So while yes, we can do more as a state, and we should do more as a state, and that's coming from a father with a child that has autism in the Wichita Public School District, we also need the feds to pick up their end.
Wow. And I guess one of the other questions that we have as we look at all of this, at least from my perspective, is how do we keep programs like this going and get more of them out there?
Well, and how do we evaluate programs like this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think not to be the lone cynic here, but like, I don't think she's going to any state on her publicity tour and being like, I don't think you're running a very good system here. Maybe do better, guys. But like, if this is a program and if there is some data, if there are some results to back it up, like, yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's a great way of kind of taking something that works, doing experiments here and there, and then finding a way to help schools across Kansas. But I mean, maybe this is one of the success stories. There's also school districts I've sat in on school board meetings where maybe I question how those ESSER funds were funded. I didn't see her at those schools, but yeah.
Well,
little context.
Always, yes, context matters, and that's part of why we do this show. Well, Kansas is setting out on a 5-year, $451 million project to spread high-speed internet statewide, serving up broadband access as a basic necessity, not a luxury. The Kansas Reflector reports the National Telecommunication Information and Administration has earmarked $451 million for Kansas to work on narrowing the digital divide. Jade Piros de Carvalho is now the director of the resulting Kansas Office of Broadband Development. She told the Reflector, businesses and households that don't have that connection are really cut off from participating in the economy and our democracy. I mean, literally everything in our lives today seems to be tied to broadband, right? The governor says Kansas has submitted a comprehensive broadband equity access and deployment plan to the feds, outlining an approach to getting broadband to unserved and underserved areas. Piros de Carvalho said about 150,000 Kansans lack subscriptions to high-speed internet. The service gap is largely attributable to lack of infrastructure, with 87,000 locations unserved and 57,000 underserved by broadband across 105 counties, 4 sovereign tribal nations, and 1,900 cities, towns, and villages in Kansas. In May, a report showed 438,000 Kansas households were eligible for connectivity financial assistance, but only about a quarter of them were enrolled. That ranked Kansas 35th in the nation. Piros de Carvalho said the preference would be to bury fiber cable to every Kansas location in need, but that's not likely due to the high cost. It's more likely 3/4 of the work will involve fiber, with the remainder accomplished by aerial wireless technology. Lots of numbers there. It comes down to we don't have enough access in Kansas, and this is not just a one-sided problem. A lot of people think, well, it's rural Kansas. But we also have pockets in urban areas that also have serious issues.
Yeah, no, we do. And we kind of ran into that issue during COVID when we went to a lot of online learning. But I will approach this from the rural situation right now. And the last census was not kind to our rural communities. People are fleeing. They're moving out of state, or they're moving to Wichita or Johnson County. And internet access is a reason. And it's also jobs. A lot of jobs are going remote these days. Well, these are perfect jobs going remote for rural Kansas, except they don't have internet access to work remotely. So it's an investment that we have to get out there to turn the tide to get folks to move back out to rural Kansas. It's that, it's housing, it's childcare. I mean, it's a whole triage of things, but healthcare, yeah. But internet access is key to that solution.
Yeah. And Casey, talking about broadband access, you wouldn't be with us today without it. It is a part of success today, whether you're talking about a job or school.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment in regards to the article itself, with respect to we have $415 million coming in, of course, with respect to our rural economy. The Rural Revitalization Committee, one thing that they put out was that one thing that we can actually do to revitalize our rural communities, making sure that our rural communities do have access to broadband. Our farmers, the rural economy will actually benefit enormously with respect to this particular development. So I'm very excited about it with respect to the dollars that will be actually focused with respect to making sure that we have broadband access, not only to the rural communities, but also even in the urban communities. There are some areas still within the urban communities that are still lacking high-speed internet. So this is an issue, an area that this money that's coming in will be able to address. It will actually move our state forward with respect to connectivity, making sure that residents are being connected to the internet at very high speed. So I'm very excited about it, and can't wait for it to be implemented throughout our state.
All right. And Adam, I know you're in a more rural area, being up in Harvey County. What are you guys seeing as far as broadband access there?
Well, it's been the summer of broadband access in Harvey County. Idea Tech has spread through Newton. They were going through my yard a couple days ago. There's been some lines hit. So they've been spreading through Newton, Halstead, Heston. All of these communities have now gotten this fiber access. Everyone has been very excited about it. For me, I mean, it's been nice because it offers a cheaper option, a more reliable option, a faster option. I'm not paid by Idea Tech. I'm just excited. But yeah, so that's, that's been an exciting thing. And I mean, that's one of the things that, like, if you really want to talk about, like, look at Kansas. Kansas is one of the cheapest costs of living in the United States. Like, I was having lunch with an insurance agent a couple months ago, and he was talking about how they would get insurance agents trained, and then they would lose them because they would get all these certifications, these states, and then they would have a company in New York or California. They would hire them up. They'd allow them to live there, work remotely, and just work for them and get paid way more. But, like, think about the opportunity in some of these Kansas areas. If you could, for a low cost of living, have your house, have your home, have your lifestyle that you liked, but then be paid coastal wages. Like, that could be a big thing for places like rural Kansas.
Yeah, there's actually a senator who has told me that they see that as the future of Kansas, as the remote work haven of the country. Well, and we still have time for one more topic. Finally today, how much should your state lawmakers earn for representing you? Increasing long stagnant legislative pay could revolutionize state politics, allowing Kansans from all backgrounds a chance to serve. But some top legislative Republicans are also urging caution in how high the pay raise should be. The Kansas Reflector reports a law passed this year calls for a reevaluation of how much Kansas pays state lawmakers, leading to a raise. But there's a lot of disagreement on just how big of a raise that should be. The law formed a 9-person independent commission to decide the rates of salary and per diem compensation going forward. Currently, state legislators get a base salary of $88.66 for every day during the session, a salary that hasn't changed since 2009. Starting in October, lawmakers will get a per diem allowance of $166 a day to offset food and lodging costs during the session. In an average 92-day session, the pay works out to about $23,429 a year, with additional compensation for leadership positions. The state ranked in the bottom third for legislative compensation in a 2019 legislative study of 14 other states. The study found Oklahoma, Missouri, and Colorado all paid their lawmakers about $48,000 a year. The new commission will set its first round of pay rates by December 1st to go into effect in the 2025 legislative session, with rates set to be readjusted every 4 years after that. Supporters of better pay say it will help equalize the field. One of the reasons that we introduced this legislation is we believe in representative democracy, said Jason Watkins with the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. The legislature should look like a cross-section of the state of Kansas, and folks from all walks of life should be able to serve. But Republican leadership is cautioning against too much of a pay hike. Senate President Ty Masterson told The Reflector, "We'd like to see us make that hurdle go away. However, I also don't believe it should be a career. There needs to be some level of service. Public service at some level does have sacrifice to it, and I think that should exist, but there needs to be balance." House Speaker Dan Hawkins agreed, saying, "We're a citizen legislature, so we don't want people just to consider that their main job. We need to go back home and go to work, and so there's always going to be a balance." And I know that I have talked with, I don't know how many lawmakers over the years who say that they lose money every year they're in the State House. It is an expensive proposition, and a big reason why we see a heavy turn toward older, whiter lawmakers, because younger, more diverse lawmakers, they've got to pay the bills.
Well, and it's also, think about like holding onto a job, right? Like it's how many jobs, I mean, if you own your own business, maybe if you have a law firm, maybe if you have a couple other different businesses, maybe if you have your farm, but it's hard to just be gone for 3 months of the year and say, hey, hold my spot open. They'll say, well, thanks, great, I'd like to have someone else. And I mean, for some lawmakers, I know it has been a barrier, or they're like trying to pick up odd jobs after the legislative session because they weren't able to hold the job they had. So I can see why raising that money or raising that pay would kind of remove a hurdle for regular people, but would that encourage more regular people to run? I don't know, because there's still a lot of hurdles in the process.
Yeah, it's not even the only financial hurdle.
You got to fundraise, you got to have connections, you got to be with the right people.
Now, the other side of this is they put a commission in place so that lawmakers don't have to face that appearance of, well, we just voted ourselves a raise.
Yeah. And it is kind of a conflict of interest for us to vote ourselves a raise. So what we did is put this commission together of appointees that can't be legislators. Now there is a requirement that 2 of the appointees have to be ex-legislators, but everybody else just members of the community, and let them tell us what we should make. Let them make that. You know, we raise state employee pay 2 to 5% a year, and every year we actually have to go in and exempt ourselves from that pay raise.
All right, and we're going to have to leave that there. Perfect. I'm sorry, Casey, we're out of time. Thank you all, Casey, Adam, Nick, for joining us this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, the Wichita Eagle, and KSN News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to keep the conversation going with you. Just find us over on social media. For now, stay safe and have a great week.